So anyway, he goes on to win the Kentucky Derby. And not only does he win the Kentucky Derby, he does something remarkable. He breaks the Kentucky Derby record, track record, uh, at Churchill Downs for that mile and a quarter race. But he doesn't just break it. He does it in spectacular fashion, in very weird, odd fashion, something that you don't see. He broke last from the gate, and going into the first turn, he was pretty much dead last. But he started circling the field. He started passing everybody on the outside of the track. And they actually broke down his quarters. They break them down into quarter miles for that race, and he had 5 different measurements for his quarter mile time. The first quarter mile, he uh, did in 25.15 seconds. And for anybody who doesn't know why they're measured in fifths, I always wondered this until I started really researching horse racing a little bit. Um, the times were always measured in fifths because a fifth of a second is the length of a horse. So you could tell how many lengths a horse won by how many fifths of a second he was ahead. So he did the first quarter mile in 25 and a fifth. He did the second quarter mile in 24 seconds flat. He did the third quarter mile in 23 seconds and 4 fifths. He did the fourth quarter mile in 23 and 2 fifths seconds. And he did the last quarter mile in 23 seconds flat. He did every quarter mile faster than the one before it. It had never been done before. And he did the Kentucky Derby final time was 1:59 and 2 fifths. A minute 59 seconds and a minute 59 and 2 fifths seconds. He was the first horse to win the Kentucky Derby in under 2 minutes. The irony to that is that the horse that he beat, which was Sham, which is who he passed on the last turn, also finished the Kentucky Derby in under 2 minutes. They were actually the first 2 horses to do the Kentucky Derby in under 2 minutes. Had never been done before. And I think he beat the record by like 3 fifths of a second, which is about normal when you break a record. You break it a fifth, 2 fifths, 3 fifths, occasionally a second. You know, you usually don't knock that much time off of the record time. So, while all this is going on, the week leading up to the Preakness, the Nixon Watergate trial started. Now, you can imagine what the mood of the country is. Pretty down on ourselves. We're in kind of a national funk. And all of a sudden, here comes this racehorse. There hadn't, at that point, the last Triple Crown winner was in 1948. It had been 25 years since somebody had won a Triple Crown, and a lot of people had given up on it. So, he goes into the Preakness. Everybody is wondering, okay, was that just luck? Did he just get a good trip? Maybe Sham can pick him off this time. Who knows? And the Preakness is run at Pimlico Racecourse in Maryland. And the one thing about Pimlico is it's a little smaller. It's got a little sharper turns. The turns are not banked as high. So they're a little flatter. One of the prominent thoughts is that you come out sharp out of the gate, and then you kind of ease up around that first turn, because if you don't, you're going to end up swinging wide and allowing people to cut inside you. So most people would go out gangbusters, kind of slow up around that turn, and then turn it on again for the straightaway. Secretariat again broke last, dead last. They go through the straightaway going into the turn out of the gate, and as they're starting to make the turn, and it was sort of they kind of lengthened that. There was kind of like a group in front and then a secondary group, and he was behind the secondary group. He decided that I'm going to circle this field now. And he swung out wide, and I say he, I mean the horse. His jockey's name was Ron Turcott. Um, he didn't ask him to do that. All he did was kind of take him outside. There's a Secretariat's biographer is a guy named Bill Knack, and he describes it as he was on the reins, and he made this adjustment, this move like he was adjusting his cuff of his shirt, and that little motion, Secretariat picked up on it on his mouth, went to the outside and took off, and he, from the time he took off, which was right at when he got to the beginning of the turn, which means everybody else was about a quarter of the way into the turn. From the time he took off and started around the outside of that field, through that turn and to the other side of the turn, he passed the whole field. He circled the whole field inside the turn. By the time they came out of the turn to that straightaway, he was in first place. And one of the horses he passed was Sham. He came out of that kind of even with the lead horse and just kind of inched in front of him. And as he's doing this, Sham comes out of the pack 2 horses back and starts chasing after him. And the 2 of them left the field. And Sham was trying to get him, and Secretariat just was not having it and just kept pulling away from him. And there was a funny, not funny, but one of the things that jockeys do to get speed out of their horses, they kind of smack them with a whip. So he comes out of that turn into the home stretch, and Sham's chasing him. And it was kind of funny. The track announcer who's calling the race comments on the fact that Sham's jockey, a very well-known and well-respected jockey named Lafitte Pinkai, is going to the whip on Sham. And he says, with his left hand, he says, there's a strong left-handed whip by Pinkai. And, a few seconds later, he says, and there's that left-handed whip again by Pinkai. He goes to it time and time again. And then the guy must have looked at this and then looked at Ron Turcott on Secretariat. Ron Turcott had his whip in his hand and he was on the reins. He never used it. He says, and the announcer went something to the effect of, he goes to it time and time again, but Ronnie Turcott has his whip put away. And as almost like Secretariat heard him. As he says this, Secretariat starts inching away from him, like pulling away from Sham at the back end of the stretch toward the finish line. And the announcer didn't miss a beat. He said, and Ronnie Turcott has his whip put away, and Secretariat has him put away. He's beginning to draw away. And the funny thing about that race, it went into the books officially as a time of 1:55 and 2, I think, which was about a second and 2/5 off the track record. Everybody looked at that time and went, huh? That ain't right. And they figured out that there was a malfunction in the track timer up by the gate, and that it started too early when they started the race. There was a discrepancy. They decided that somebody on the track, a photographer or somebody, had timed him at 1:54 and 2, which would have only put him 2/5 off the track record, which was 1:54, done a few years earlier by a horse named Canonera II. And that's what they went with. And, I mean, Secretary's people didn't care. He won the race. Meh. But the people that were in charge were, and all the writers and stuff were like, no, something's not right here. So I think it was CBS went to the Maryland Racing Board and did a side-by-side comparison of Canonera II's Preakness when he set the track record and Secretariat's race. And they determined that Secretariat beat him by 3 lengths, which would have been 3/5 of a second, which would have put his time, I think, at, or maybe it was 5 lengths, I can't remember. But it would have put his time at 153 and 2, which would have been the track record. So the daily racing form, because the Maryland board refused to change it for some strange reason, because the source wasn't an official track source, the daily racing form put their own daily racing form time of 153 and 2 and labeled it a new track record in their official publication, which is like the Bible of horse racing, the daily racing form. It wasn't until I think 2012 or something like that, where they finally went back and digitally proved that he broke the record. And not only did he break the record, he broke it by more than what they thought he did. He actually got timed by computer at 153 flat, which means 153.0, which knocked almost, I think, an entire second off the record, the track record. Now, the Preakness is a little shorter race, which is why that time is a little shorter than the 1.25 Kentucky Derby. The race is 1 mile and 3/16, I believe. So, now he's won 2/3 of the Triple Crown. Now the world just explodes with Secretariat fever. He's the first horse in 25 years that has a real chance at winning the Triple Crown. Can he do it? Will Sham do it? Who knows?